Today, the town of Roswell, New Mexico, located in southeastern New Mexico, is known worldwide for being the site of an alleged UFO crash in 1947. Millions of tourists have visited the town since the 50th anniversary of the event back in 1997. However, Roswell wasn't always the hub of southeastern New Mexico, nor was it always known for UFOs and aliens. Take a look at this old postcard from the 1960s. As you can see, there are no aliens or UFOs. Instead, Roswell promoted itself as the home of the Bottomless Lakes, the New Mexico Military Institute, and the gateway to the mountain village of Ruidoso. I'm standing in the J.P. White home, built over 100 years ago. It now serves as a museum and headquarters for the Historical Society for Southeastern New Mexico, custodians of Roswell's rich history. On behalf of the Historical Society, I'd like for you to join me on a journey through Roswell's rich and diverse history. Roswell began life in the late 1860s due to the burgeoning cattle industry of the era. As men such as Charles Goodnight, Oliver Loving, and John Chisholm drove cattle into New Mexico from Texas, they needed a spot to stop and water their herd.
Well, like a lot of towns of the era, Roswell has its origins in the cattle trade of the late 1860s. In this case, the Goodnight Loving Cattle Trail, which not coincidentally can be glimpsed behind me in the painting by Kim Wiggins. All Roswell was a tiny little 15 by 15 foot adobe trading post built by James Patterson, and that was eventually taken over by Van C. Smith. And you know, when it came time to finally name it, Smith decided to name it after his father, Roswell Smith of Nebraska.
The thing that strikes me about Van C. Smith, and I believe that Roswell was named after his father, Roswell, but the thing that strikes me is that he, to me, was the great entertainer. He was a fun-loving guy. He liked gambling. He built a racetrack here in Roswell. And I think a lot of what he did for the entertainment value actually lured a lot of the cowboys in for a night of fun on the town.
Today, the spot where Smith built his saloon and post office is called Pioneer Plaza. When Smith tired of Roswell and left, the buildings were bought up by Captain J.C. Lee, a Southerner who bought the boarding house and general store. Under his more gentle influence, Roswell became a much more welcoming place. During the chaos of the Lincoln County War, Roswell itself was in great danger of succumbing to the violence of the era. It would be up to Captain Lee to help keep the peace.
Credit for getting Captain Lee to Roswell really should go to Major W.W. Wilde, who was Captain Lee's father-in-law. He's one of the founding fathers of Roswell that doesn't get much credit for what he did, but he's the one who came and saw the investment possibilities in the Pecos Valley and the Roswell area. And so he talked J.C. Lee and his wife, Sally, into coming to Roswell. And they came about the late 1870s. And so Lee, along with Wilde, bought up land or otherwise acquired land to start developing the area. And he also enlarged the store that Van C. Smith had. So starting in the late 1877 and continuing really for the rest of his life, Captain Lee was busy developing Roswell, the businesses, the land, the farms, the ranches. And so because of all he did in developing Roswell, he's known as the father of Roswell.
John Simpson Chisholm came to New Mexico in the late 1860s and established a ranch south of Roswell. As Chisholm had taken up sides in the Lincoln County War, one of the men under Chisholm's employ was the notorious outlaw, Billy the Kid.
So Billy the Kid didn't ride through Roswell a whole lot. I mean, he did pass through occasionally, you know, to pick up his mail or see Ash Upson at the trading post. There's a legend that Captain Joseph C. Lee had a talk with Billy the Kid and told him, "Kid, you better not cut up any of your capers in Roswell." And supposedly Billy was receptive to that and, you know, never caused any trouble here. Now, Pat Garrett lived in Roswell for some time. He traveled to Roswell from Fort Sumner. They wanted him to run for sheriff of Lincoln County, all based on the campaign that he would track down Billy the Kid, who some people say he was friends with, some people don't, and eliminate him. So, you know, a lot of people say the Lincoln County War ended when Billy the Kid was finally killed in 1881, and that's when the area finally began to settle down.
Times were troubled in Lincoln County due to rampant cattle rustling, most of which was blamed on Billy the Kid. It would be up to the new sheriff, Patrick F. Garrett, to put an end to the thieving, and on a moonlight summer night in 1881, Garrett tracked Billy the Kid to Fort Sumner and shot him, effectively ending a turbulent period in southeastern New Mexico's history. With the menace of Billy the Kid behind him, Garrett turned his attention to other endeavors, which would eventually result in the creation and cultivation of Chaves County. As the age of the outlaw was coming to an end, southeastern New Mexico slowly became more civilized, with many new settlers arriving in the area. One of the biggest developments in Roswell was the discovery of a huge, heretofore unknown water basin.
Well, the thing about Roswell, this is the most marvelous water system there is in the world. They had springs, South Springs and North Springs and Berenda were flowing. They had fish in them. They were big rivers, actually, 50 CFS flowing. The thing was this whole country was kind of waterlogged, and people were suspicious, but they didn't know exactly why. And there was a merchant in Roswell, did not like the drinking water, so he drilled a well and got the first artesian basin.
Pat Garrett was something of a schemer. You know, he always had an idea cooking in the back of his mind, and one of his best ideas was to go ahead and use North and South Spring River and the Pecos to irrigate the Roswell area. And it's really interesting. He was one of the only ones with the intuition to you know, do that. Garrett partnered with a man named Charles B. Eddy from the Carlsbad region, and together they traveled back east to look for investors. And one of the men that they found was John James Hagerman. And interestingly enough, Hagerman did not like Garrett and booted him out of his own company, more or less. So poor Pat Garrett didn't get to revel in any of the glory of the successful irrigation project. Around this same time, in the late 1890s, a lot was going on in Chaves County. Nathan Jaffa was drilling a well in his backyard and accidentally tapped into a massive underground artesian water reservoir. So if you look at photographs from Roswell in the 1890s, almost every photograph has an artesian well, you know, somewhere in the background. So the town just went crazy for this water.
By this time, Roswell had amassed a population of nearly 2,000 people and was home to a burgeoning military institute, in addition to being the seat of a newly created Chaves County, established in 1889 thanks to the efforts of Pat Garrett and Captain Lee. It was also during this time that the J.P. White home was built. White, who had come to the area in the 1880s with his uncle George W. Littlefield, married Lou Tomlinson. 9 years later, in 1912, Lou's father, D.Y. Tomlinson, began construction of a home for the couple. Quickly, it became known as one of the most beautiful and elaborate homes in the town. J.P. White became an influential businessman in the town of Roswell. He died in 1934 at the age of 77. Around this same time, Roswell played host to one of its more famous residents, Dr. Robert H. Goddard. Despite the Depression era of the 1930s, Roswell continued to flourish and improve, thanks in part to the Works Progress Administration.
Well, Robert Goddard is known historically as the father of the modern rocket. And he came to Roswell in 1930 and spent 12 years here doing experimentation with liquid fuel. And his first actual success took place in Massachusetts when he launched a rocket in 1926 at his Aunt Effie's farm in Auburn, Massachusetts. He was a professor at that point in time at Clark College, and he had been playing with both solid and liquid fuels, but this was the first successful flight of liquid propellant rockets. And it was the progenitor, really, of everything that came after, any sort of launch vehicle, from a missile to a rocket, from Red Star to the space shuttle. And so it's very current today. He was the founder of the liquid-fueled rocket in America.
Roswell, was an interesting place in the 1930s, in large part to the Works Progress Administration. For instance, the Civilian Conservation Corps had a hand in establishing Bottomless Lakes, which was actually New Mexico's very first state park. There was also something called the Federal Writers Project, which was interesting because it paid reporters to go out and interview these old-timers. And in the southeastern New Mexico region, pretty much every single old-timer that could claim that they rode with Billy the Kid, shot at Billy the Kid, were shot by Billy the Kid, everything. If you read a Federal Writers Project from that era, almost always it revolves around Billy the Kid, which is really fascinating.
As Roswell progressed into the 1940s, it became the home of a large U.S. Army airfield, and during the outbreak of World War II, an area located south of Roswell, known as Orchard Park, became the site of a German POW camp.
The POWs replaced in farm labor during the during World War II. I was not here. I was in the military overseas, but my folks had the POWs here to do the farm work, irrigate, pick cotton, hoe cotton, do whatever was necessary. They were in the POW camp, and they'd go every morning and pick up a load of POWs and bring them in to work.
Ironically, after the end of World War II, the Roswell Army Airfield played an even more important role in U.S. history than it did during the war. This was because it became home to the prestigious 509th Bomb Unit. And out of all of the historic facets of the Roswell Air Base, it is still best known worldwide for a flying saucer crash in the summer of 1947. Eventually, the Roswell Army Airfield became a permanent installation for the Strategic Arm Command, known as Walker Air Force Base. As a result of the base's permanent status, Roswell experienced a population explosion of nearly 13,000 people, making for a population of 40,000 by 1960.
The base was really an integral part of Roswell. At the first, there were no houses on the base, or very few, and all the people, all the officers and airmen lived in Roswell itself. They became integrated in the schools, the churches, and the businesses of Roswell. It was a very lively town. They brought many cultures in here because people from all over the United States were here. It was a very cultural, rich time that we had that.
Unfortunately, as they say, all good things must come to an end, and the base sadly closed in 1967. As more and more people left, some feared that Roswell could become a ghost town.
So the base was a tremendous force in the growth and the rebounding of Roswell in the years following World War II, and then following the closure of the base itself. It still had effects for many years. it was very slow going. The population of Roswell by 1970 in the census was way down compared to what it had been in 1960 when it had been at its highest. But Roswell did begin to grow, and new businesses came in and located at what became the Roswell Industrial Air Center.
Despite the setbacks of the late 1960s, due to hard work and ingenuity, the town bounced back in the 70s as new businesses moved into the old space once occupied by Walker Air Force Base, now known as the Roswell International Air Center. In this area, Eastern New Mexico University Roswell was born. The 1980s saw a bustling dairy industry form. And today, Chaves County produces around 1.7 billion pounds of milk annually.
I think Roswell is in an oil community, oil state, and it has its ups and downs. It's sort of like a roller coaster. But yes, the UFO Museum, the whole aura around UFOs crashing here in Roswell has lured people from throughout the world. So we're a very busy mecca for people that are looking for something unusual. The other thing to me is that if we think about Goddard again, Goddard was the guy who was aiming for the stars. He was actually not just trying to get to the moon, he was initially trying to get to Mars. And so I think Goddard would appreciate the fact that there's this sort of alien UFO aura surrounding Roswell today.
I, for one, am very proud to be from Roswell. I think out of towns across the United States, even without the UFOs and the aliens, I think we have absolutely one of the most unique histories from anywhere.
As you can see, what began as a small trading post along the Goodnight Loving Cattle Trail today thrives as the hub of southeastern New Mexico. With 150 years of rich history behind it, and a town built by hard-working people on a foundation of rich, diverse history, who knows what possibilities lie in the future? Only time will tell.